Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This is the third week of the Advent season. Next Sunday is Christmas Eve, and then of course Monday will be Christmas Day, the following Monday. And as I said at the beginning of the series of talks for this time of the year, this is Advent. In traditional theology, this is called the Advent. And Advent means a time of preparation, a time to prepare for the arrival of a very important person. Imagine you had a distinguished guest coming to your home, or a family member that you hadn't seen for a long time. Somebody very precious to you, somebody very important to you is coming to visit. You can imagine the time of preparation that would go into getting ready for this arrival. You would put on the best tablecloths. You would put the best linens in the guest room. You would clean. You would start bringing in food. What kind of food does this person like? What kind of beverage do they like? What do they like to do? Do we need to go rent the kind of movies they like? Do we need to go buy records? What is it that we need to do? But we would spend our time getting ready, anticipating the arrival of this person. And Advent is a similar idea, a similar concept, that there is something very, very important that is coming, and we must prepare for it. But this arrival is not a person. It is something more precious to us than a human. And it is the arrival of the Christ. Now, we do this every year. We go through this cycle every year. The earth goes around the sun once a year, but the sun is moving through the galaxy, and the galaxy is moving through the universe. So we come to this concept every year, but hopefully every year we're at a different level. Excuse me. We have grown some over the year, and our concept and our experience of what the Christ is has expanded. And now we are preparing ourselves to receive it into our consciousness at a different level, at a higher level, at an expanded level. We're ready to set the groundwork for 2018 to be another year of our continuous spiritual growth. The spiritual growth and the spiritual path that we talk about is simply realizing through experience, realizing more and more. Hopefully every day, but maybe not so. Maybe we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But over the year's time, we grow in wisdom and understanding and the experience of our spiritual nature. That is, do we grow in our realization of the presence and the activity of the divine everywhere, omnipresence everywhere, in us, as us, around us, through us, in those we love and in those we would call our enemies, in the miracle of the sunrise, in the beauty of the sunset, and the blessing of the breakfast that you eat in the morning, the very love of God providing the nutrition to the body that it has created out of the dust of the earth, as a vehicle for this consciousness that we know as ourself, but it knows as itself. This is the experience of the mystical. This is what I talked last week about the mystics and the mystical experience and what the mystics have taught. A mystic, as Dr. Holmes tells us, is not a mysterious person, but someone who has a deep inner sense of their connection with all of life, with all of the divine. And that's what we're talking about. So we want to kind of come to what is our, not mine, but each individual must come to this decision What does the Christ mean to you now, this year, at this stage in your development? Not what it meant to you as a little child, not what your parents might have told you, not what your teachers might have told you, not what you hear on television. But what does it mean to you? What is the meaning of the Christ? I'm going to toss out some ideas, but the purpose of the ideas is simply to help point a way for us to have that experience, because this thing that we're talking about is not an intellectual concept. It is an experience. And it is an experience that exists in consciousness before words, before thoughts. And it is that experience that we wish to grow into a more complete realization of. So the words to describe that which is before words, they simply don't exist. They're simply not there. And this is why the mystics will talk about the ineffableness of God. In the Hindu tradition, they sometimes start a prayer by saying, "O ineffable one, O ineffable one." This is something to be experienced, not something to simply be discussed. However, the only way we can become aware of it is by discussing it. So I want to start by just kind of tossing out several different teaching stories, parables. And the reason for that is sometimes the parable conveys a meaning where long analysis, drawn out discussions just simply don't. Emmett Fox tells us this. He says, "Isn't it amazing that we can read one simple passage from Scripture, from the Bible, and then talk about it for days? And in talking about it for days, we never ever get back to expressing it as succinctly and as perfectly as we first read it." And he says that's why we recognize the Scriptures as inspired. That's why we recognize them as being so powerful. I mean, just think about the 23rd Psalm. "The Lord shepherds me. I lack nothing." We feel that, see. It stirs something within us. Now, each one of us could go sit down at our keyboard and we could probably type 3 or 4 or 5 pages of ideas about what that stirred in us, what that means to us. But what is important is that it stirred something within us. We felt it. So teaching stories and parables, they have a way of doing that. They strike a chord within us, something that resonates within us. Like the Ella Fitzgerald commercial where her voice would shatter the glass and then they'd play back the tape and it would shatter again. Is it live or is it tape? There's something that vibrates. There's something in there that quivers. Our heart quivers when we hear it. But words can't express what that is that's quivering in our heart. We try. We try. But we fail. Because it's not something to be discussed. It's not something that can adequately be discussed. It's only something that can be felt. So here are a couple parables that I want to just put out, and then I'll try to talk about them a little bit and see if we can bring them together into some context. And remember what we were talking about today, the context that we're talking about today is the meaning of the Christ, the meaning of the Christ. Now, as our consciousness matures, there's a time in our consciousness and there's a time in a certain level of organizational development where this is like a last name. This is a person. The great exception. And then as consciousness matures a little bit, we move from the more dogmatic way of thinking to the more Gnostic way of thinking. We say to ourselves, well, what does that mean? But what does it mean? And then the idea is that, well, maybe this is an example. Maybe this is the way shower. But then as we move more into the mystical, we can recognize that it is an experience of unity with the presence of the divine, the I amness, the oneness. There's a story that kind of runs through some Eastern traditions, and it's interesting because teachers always take stories and kind of modify them for the purpose at hand. But here's kind of the drift of the story. And it's about a frog that lived in a well and a frog that lived in the ocean. And this little frog lived in the well, was completely happy in the well, had everything it needed in the well. You know, it had a little shelf inside the well above the water level where it could hop up, and when it wanted to swim, it could jump down in the water and swim, and then it could come back up, and it would catch little insects as they went by and floated on the water. And it could look up through the top, and it could see the sunlight. And this was the little frog's entire world. And it was perfectly content. And then one day a visitor came. Another frog came and came into the well. And the well frog said, you know, where are you from? What's your name? What are you doing here? And the other frog said, well, I live in the ocean, and I just came here to visit. And the well frog said, what's an ocean? I don't know what an ocean is. That word is not familiar to me. So the ocean frog tried to describe to the well frog what the ocean is, the vastness of the ocean. The well frog's whole world was this little circle in which it lived. And the well frog said, I don't understand what you're talking about. No such place exists. I can't comprehend that. You're talking nonsense. And the ocean frog said, I can't explain it, but I can take you to it. The mystic Rumi gives us a similar idea. Beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there. In Buddhism, we're given a parable of the raft. And the idea is that we are standing on the shore of a river. And we sense that there's something on the other side of the river. Something we ought to do, something we ought to experience, something for us to know. And there's a desire within our hearts to get there. So we use our intellect, we use logic, we use reason. How are we going to get across this river? And we come up with ideas that what we'll do is we'll build a raft. So we get busy And we make some tools. Maybe we take a stone and some vine, and we make sort of an axe. We chop down some trees, and we bind the logs together with more vine. And we make some paddles and we make some poles to help propel the raft across the river. And we set out on this journey. And after a short while, we arrive on the other side of the river. Now the raft has served its purpose. There's no need to put the raft on our backs and try to carry it around with us. Show everybody what a beautiful raft we had, what a wonderful raft we made, how well it served us as we crossed the river. We're done. We're done with it. It's time to let it go. And then the Buddhist instruction goes on further to say, then we have the realization that there never was a river. We never needed a raft. That we are in fact exactly where we were before we started, only everything looks different. There's another story that it usually comes to us as an Amish parable or an Amish teaching story. And it's about a small child who's looking out the front window of the house, looking out on the road. And something's disturbing is going on out on the road, and the child is just standing there at the window, greatly disturbed by whatever this is that's taking place. And the little girl's father comes up and he says, "Why are you crying?" And she tells him what's going on out on the road and how it's disturbing her. And he says, "Come with me." And he takes her to the back of the house and he opens the shade looking out on the garden. He said, "Tell me about your garden." And she points out all the different vegetables in there and what rows they're planted in. And she points out the flowers that they've planted and how pretty they are. And she talks about when the harvest comes, they're going to pick the tomatoes off the vines, and she and her mommy are going to can them. And she stops crying. And he leans down and he whispers into her ear, "You see? You were looking out the wrong window." You've probably heard the one about the sculptor. Sometimes they attribute this to Michelangelo. I have no idea if it ever even really happened. It's a story. It's a parable. But the sculptor gets this big block of marble. And someone says, "What are you going to do with that block of marble?" And he says, "I'm going to sculpt a beautiful angel." And they say to him, "Well, how are you going to do that?" And he says, "I'm going to chip away at everything that's not like the angel." I want you to imagine that you're in a room. It's daylight. The sunlight is coming in. And you have rolls of like black tar paper or black construction paper, and a staple gun. And you start taking these rolls of black paper and stapling them over the windows and the doors. And of course, you've got an electric light. You can see what you're doing. And after you have every crack to the outside world covered, you turn out the light. And now it is pitch dark. It is darker than you have ever seen before. And you feel your way over to one of the windows, and you have a pin. And you take that pin and you start poking tiny little holes into the black paper. Now, as you do that, the light that is already there comes streaming through those holes, shines down on the floor, makes a pattern. You even realize that you could maybe draw something with these pinholes. You could make an outline of a rabbit, for example, and the little rabbit will be projected on the floor. From where you stand inside the room, each point of light is different. Each point of light is separate. They appear to be many different points of light. But on the other side of the paper, there's only one light. There's only one light. Because our perception is limited, we think there are many. But there is only one. Now, what do all of these different ideas, what do all of these different stories have to do with one another? First of all, I hope that you remember the stories. Long after you've forgotten the spoken word, remember the stories. Remember the pictures that they created in your head. Remember the feeling that came up as you heard them. Because they're trying to point us to that which is beyond the intellect. You've heard the term walking the razor's edge. We use the intellect to help us understand that there's a point where the intellect no longer functions. And we have to go beyond. We have to go beyond. It's like saying, I'm inside the room and I understand that there's only one light outside the room, but I can only see many different points of light inside the room. So the intellect points the way. But unless and until I have that experience of the light on the other side of that paper, it's only an idea, it's only a concept, it's not an experience. So there are some things that we can only know through experience. There are some things that no matter how much someone tries to explain to you what it's like, you will never know what it is like until you experience it. Eating a chocolate candy bar. You ask people what a chocolate candy bar is like, they'll all try to tell you. But the fact is, you won't know what it's like for you until you have a piece of chocolate. We talk about being in love and falling in love, and we write songs about it. Movies and plays, poetry and greeting cards. Yet until one falls in love, we don't know. We don't know what it is. So there are some things that we can only know through experience. And the kind of experience we're talking about is before the analysis begins, right? Before the intellect gets in there and starts saying, well, this is like, chocolate is an awful lot like this, or chocolate is not like that, right? So the intellect goes in and it divides things and it says this, that, and the other, and it puts it into little pigeonholes, and it's satisfied if it finds the right pigeonhole to put something in. Well, it knows everything there is to know about it. There's no need to try to explore any longer. But there's something that precedes that. There's the experience that is before the ideas of right doing and wrong doing. There's that field that Rumi is talking about. There's that ocean that the ocean frog is talking about, that our limited comprehension, we can't grasp the idea. What does that mean? What does that mean? So we come now to this idea of, what is the Christ? What is the Christ? What is this thing that we are preparing for? And what I invite you to consider, but only use the consideration as a way of getting to the experience, is that what we are talking about is the experience, not the intellectual knowing, but the experience of the unity of life. The experience of the presence of God right here and right now. In us, as us, around us, through us, but in and as and around and through everyone, everything. Like the piece of marble that Michelangelo was working with, this awareness of the experience of the presence is already within us. It's not something that we could get to know by reading books. It's not something that we could make happen by repeating prayers over and over and over again. It's already there. It is inviting us to awaken to its presence. It cannot force itself upon us. It is there. It is clearing its throat so we will find it. And what our progress or what our journey is discovering it. And that is what I'm referring to this year as the Christ. It is the point where the divine becomes human. It is the point where there's no longer any separation. See, it's the point where we remove that tar paper that we've put over the window, and we just are in the light, and we are one with the light, and we feel no sense of separation. And it's not a sense of losing identity or annihilation, as some people would talk about. It is the sense of total oneness with everything. So the I am experience. This is the burning bush experience of Moses, the I am experience. So as I said a couple of weeks ago, religion is believing in somebody else's experience. Spirituality is having your own experience. So sooner or later on our spiritual path, sooner or later as we grow and we develop, this awareness of the presence of the divine starts to grow more and more in our consciousness. Now, it's always been there. It can no more leave us, than the sunlight can leave that little dot that it made on the floor. Right? That dot is the sun appearing as a dot on the floor. Think about that. You go and you put all these little pinholes in that tar paper. Can you imagine the sun that says, well, I'm going to shine through that hole? but not so much that hole over there. Right? The light can't decide which ones it's going to shine through. It shines through all of them. In New Testament terms, we're told that the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. Now, when you and I are caught up in the human experience, and we have our back to the light, and we're looking at all of those little dots of light on the floor, we judge them. We analyze them. Well, some are bigger than others, and some maybe the flap of paper didn't quite get completely punched out of the way, and some of them hardly shine at all, and the ones that shine more, well, they're better, and the ones that don't shine so much, well, they're worse. And we start labeling, and we start judging, and we start analyzing. And what we're talking about is recognizing that they are all the light. Now, some will have that light shining more visibly than others, but nevertheless, they are all the light. They are all the light. So this idea then of the Christ is that, and I invite you to read Dr. Holmes' chapter on finding the Christ, and also go back into the glossary in the back of the textbook and read his definition of the Christ. We're not talking about a person. We're not talking about the last name of a person. And we're not talking about a teacher or a way shower. We're talking of the Christ as being that point where the divine and the human meet, where the human experiences the divine, where the human gives way to the divine, where the humanity is gone and all that is left is the divine. Right? That's the principle that he's talking about. That's the principle that we're trying to get to. And that is available to each and every one, to each and every one of us. It is kind of where we are all headed, it is where we are all going. And our journey then is not a journey of adding anything to us, forcing something to happen. We can't change our diet and force this awareness. We can't change our behavior and force this awareness. It is a gift. It is a gift that comes to us by grace. Now, what we can do is make ourselves available to it, to make ourselves open to it, to make ourselves receptive to it. And we do that by chipping away everything in our consciousness, because it's the only place we have to work, right? Every place in our consciousness that is unlike the divine. We let them go. We let the ideas go. We release them. Now, it's not hard for us to understand intellectually what that might look like. It is much harder for us to truly let go of the idea of the power of matter, of the power of flesh, and to recognize that the world is a spiritual entity. So we want to go 1 foot over in our meditation, in our treatment, in our prayers, in our readings, and we want to feel really, really good about the idea that God is all there is. And then we go to work and say, except here, except in that person over there. You know, we do that. I do that. Human beings do that. And it's easy for us to, if we'll stop and think about it, rather than saying, well, my ire is justified. I have a good right to be mad at this person. We have to realize at that moment in time that you and I are caught up in the duality. At that moment in time, we were looking at the dot of light on the floor that came through that tar paper, and we were giving it all kinds of credit where no credit is due. What we have to recognize is the divine in everyone, the divine in everything. So we have our instant feedback mechanism. You know, what is our life like? Are we living our lives as if truly the very love of God is living through us and as us? Most of us would say no. I would say no. Not to the degree that I know, but I'm working on it every day. A little bit more, a little bit further. And when do we get caught up in the duality? When do we get caught up in the false appearances? We understand the ways of the world. We understand the ways of politics. We understand the ways of power. We understand the ways of control. The ways of commerce. We understand the rules that human beings have created to run or organize and run the societies in which we live. We understand the dogma and the creed that we learned as children. We understand the teachings as we grow spiritually and we read books by different authors. We understand all of those things, you see. And as we invite the experience of the Christ consciousness, the awareness of the presence of the divine, we have to be willing to say all of those things are the raft. They were necessary to get us across the river, but my goal is to be across the river and to let go of all of those concepts, every one of them. I don't want to put the raft on my back and carry it around any longer. I understand the raft is necessary. I understand teaching is necessary. I understand lectures are necessary. I understand Sunday talks are necessary. I understand that the time in prayer and meditation is necessary. But I also understand that the day is coming when I will just be at home with the beloved. Like Dr. Holmes tells us this. He says, with all you're getting, you have to get God. You know, we start out thinking, well, you know, there's a power in the universe responds to me exactly according to my belief and I can use it. And then at some point we have to say, but it tricked me into using it so that I would get to know it. And as I enter the mystical, I just want to know it. I just want to know it. Augustine said at the end of his life, he said, I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. I only want thee. So our process then is not one of becoming more spiritual. Putting on the Christ is not a process of somehow figuring out what this Christ thing is and getting more of it. It's a process of getting rid of everything that is unlike it. Chipping away that part of the marble that is not like the angel. Chipping away that part of consciousness that believes in duality, that believes in good and believes in evil, that believes in separation, that believes that we have to function in the world by the ways of the world. We have to let go of all of those things and say, I only want thee. I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. So, why don't we do that, you know? I mean, we would all kind of... all right, I got to tell you a bad joke. It just came into my head and I got to get rid of it. So back in the days of temperance, remember the temperance movement, you know, against the saloons and everything, and they had the brass bands and They would march up to the saloon, and the preacher would go in the saloon and start preaching, getting people to give up their evil ways. And this preacher goes in the saloon, and he takes his toe and he draws a line in the sawdust across the saloon floor, and he stands there and he starts preaching up a storm. And he says, all right, he says, now everybody wants to go to heaven, come over to this side of the line. And about half the people come over that side of the line, and the preacher starts preaching some more, and he stops and he says, okay, now everybody wants to go to heaven, come over to this side of the line. And everybody except one fellow came over to that side of the line. So the preacher commences to preaching some more, and he stops, and again, he says, come over to this side of the line, and the fellow doesn't move. He just sits there at the table, holding on to his glass of liquor, just looking at the preacher. So this goes on 2 or 3 more times, and the preacher goes over to him and he says, son, he says, don't you want to go to heaven when you die? And the guy says, oh, he says, when I die, I thought you were taking up a load right now. Oh Lord, make me good, but not yet, is the way the mystic said it. Oh Lord, make me good, but not yet. There's a part of the ego, there's a part of the intellect that does not want to let go. It does not want to change. It does not want to give up its sense of identity. Even though we know intellectually, we walk the razor's edge, even though we know that intellectually the idea that we formed about who and what we are is an incomplete idea, we don't want to let go of it. It's our idea. It's our sense of identity. It's our ego. We want to hold on to it. So how do we do that? How do we prevent ourselves from having the experience of the presence of the divine that is already within us, the Christ within, that is trying to get through us, right? What do we do to prevent that? In other words, instead of saying, well, what do I do to need it, to bring it to me? Well, no, it's already here, but it's covered up, see? It's covered up. It's like it's had ignorance heaped upon it. It's the spark, the poet tells us, the spark that can be desecrated but never destroyed. It's already there within us. It's awaiting our invitation, right? That's the key thing. Are you willing to invite it? Are you willing to open yourself up and say, first of all, I'm not smart enough. Because the intellect itself is not smart enough. The intellect itself is not smart enough to know what there is beyond the intellect, before the intellect. But there's something before the intellect. Beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing. Before words, but from which words come, see? So the intellect can't go there. We know it is limited. Yet we try to hold on to it. So what we do, probably the number one thing that we do, is we distract ourselves. We look out the wrong window. We get caught up in the world. We get caught up in everything else that's going on around us. We try to fix everybody else. We try to fix everybody else's problem. We're looking at the splinter in their eye and we're ignoring the plank in our own. And what we have to recognize is, and by the way, if you don't believe me, sit down and try to meditate for 5 minutes. Just sit down, put a timer on the microwave, sit there for 5 minutes, sit down, and don't do anything except breathe in, count to 1, breathe out, breathe in, count to 2, breathe out. And see if you can do that without losing count. See if you can do it for just 5 minutes without losing count. What happens to most of us is we do it 2 or 3 times and we say, oh, well, gee, did I do this? Did I do that? I forgot to do this. I forgot. And all of a sudden our thoughts are running wild and we're chasing them. Osho said it's like following a stray dog, right? Our thoughts are like a stray dog that wanders everywhere, and we follow it. Can you imagine going out and saying to yourself, what I really want more than anything in my whole life, what I really desire is this experience of the presence of God. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out on the street, and the first stray dog that comes along, I'm going to follow it and see if it leads me to God. And that's what happens to us. So The reason that we have trouble when we sit to meditate and these thoughts keep intruding is we are our own worst enemy. We are our own Satan, that which divides us. There's a part of us that doesn't want to go. There's a part of us that doesn't want to give up. And it resists. So we distract ourselves. We get involved in everybody else's affairs, everybody else's trouble. We say, well, what about those people over there? Who's going to go fix those people over there? You know, if the divine is already here and already present, why are those people so mean? And we need to go do something. And we get so caught up in that. And it is nothing more than our intellect and our ego of pointing us away from what we really need to be doing. Look at what's going on TV and in politics right now. Somebody says, well, what about this? And they say, oh, don't ask me about this. Well, what about that? They're trying to distract, right? Trying to distract. We don't need to worry about those people out there. It's like the oxygen mask on the plane. We have to put ours on first before we have anything to give. Otherwise, we're just giving them the same old stuff. Intellectual opinions, egotistical assertions. We have to come to realize I of my own self can do nothing. I of my own self, I have nothing. But there is an I am within that has it all. If I will take time to be with it. If I will take time to sit with it. If I will take time to no longer get entangled with my thoughts and distractions and look out the wrong window at everything that's wrong with the world and everything that needs to be fixed in the world and everything that I need to do in the world. And take some strength from the words that, you know, tomorrow we'll have enough problems when it gets here. Be here now. Be here now. So this idea then of the Christ, this idea that I invite you, and as I say, each and every one has to come to their own understanding. You know, I can just toss out some ideas. I can give you little pieces of the raft to lash together. But you have to lash them together in a manner that works for you. And you have to recognize that once you arrive, the raft is no longer of any purpose and be willing to let it go. And that's the other way that we keep ourselves from moving forward is we want to hold on to the past. We want to hold on to our opinions. We value and we cherish them very highly. Suppose everything that you knew was wrong. Suppose everything that you were ever told was wrong. Everything that you ever believed was wrong. So what? So what? Be still and know. Be still and know. So this idea then of what is it that we are preparing ourselves for is we are preparing ourselves for a greater experience, not a greater knowledge of, but a greater experience of the presence of the divine within us. That's the Christ that we are preparing for, the Christ consciousness, the place where the divine becomes human. We do that to the degree that we shuck off the human, we chip away the human. And the divine is already there, contained within the piece of marble. We no longer fall prey to our own distractions that are trying to tell us that everything is separate, everything is divided, everything is different, everything is broken and it needs to be fixed, and somehow I'm the one that's smart enough and strong enough to go fix it. And we just wish to see the light, the one light that is shining through everyone, regardless of the appearances, right? I think this Course in Miracles says the only thing anybody is really asking for is love, no matter how strangely they ask for it. We no longer allow ourselves to be consumed, distracting ourselves from the world out there trying to fix it. And instead we take time to just be, just simply be. So I invite you this week, take time to just sit. Take time to just sit. And don't even call up memory of this talk. Don't even call that up, but just sit. And perhaps start with the words of Augustine. I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. And just be still. Just be still. If a thought comes, say, oh, look, here comes a thought. Oh, look, there goes the thought. But don't become entangled with it. You know what I mean? By becoming entangled means following it. You know, the thought comes up, do I have enough milk in the refrigerator? Well, let me think about the last time I used the milk. We're entangled. Nope. Do I have enough milk in the refrigerator? Oh, look, there goes the thought. Be still. Whatever works for you. Your servant listens, worked for Joel Goldsmith. I of my own self do nothing. The present that we want to unwrap this Christmas, the present that we want to receive is already here. We've just covered it up with our humanness. So as you would go about unwrapping that Christmas present, unwrap the layers of ignorance, the layers of opinion, the layers of the belief in separation. Words cannot help you or me or anyone to understand, just as words would not help the well frog understand. But there are those who have gone before us who have pointed the way, and if we follow, we may get to experience the experience of the presence, and then we can let those ideas go. And so it is.